The year 1381 saw something that terrified England's ruling class more than any foreign invasion. It started on May 30th when poll tax collectors arrived in Brentwood and triggered what historians still argue about today. Royal records reference unknown men running parts of the country like a brotherhood, and chroniclers wrote panicked accounts of a great band with mysterious coordination abilities. Was this really just angry peasants losing their minds over taxes? Or was there actually an organized conspiracy that came closer to overthrowing the medieval system than anyone wants to admit? The evidence is weird enough that historians still can't agree on what actually happened. I mean, when you look at the details of how this thing unfolded, some pretty suspicious patterns start to emerge. The biggest pattern is this mystery man who appeared from nowhere and suddenly he's leading thousands of people. I mean, who is this guy? Tyler's pre-1381 life is sparsely recorded in surviving sources. Chroniclers later identify him with Maidstone and Essex and hint at military experience, but he wasn't a well-known public official. You know how medieval people were about keeping records, right? They wrote down everything. Birth records, tax rolls, court appearances, land disputes. If you existed in any official capacity, you were documented somewhere. But with Tyler, almost nothing until he emerges at Maidstone. Then boom, he's organizing military formations and negotiating face-to-face with the King of England like he's been doing this his whole life. You don't just wake up one morning and decide to lead a peasant army. That's not how leadership works. You need experience, connections, credibility. But Tyler appears with all of that already in place, which is pretty suspicious if you ask me. You know what's really weird? The guy knew exactly which legal buildings to hit, which nobles to target, and how to coordinate attacks across multiple counties. He didn't waste time burning random stuff like your typical angry mob would. These weren't random acts of violence, they were strategic strikes. They burned law books and attacked the Savoy, hit the Marshalsea prison, the Fleet prison, and specific government buildings in London. They targeted particular nobles who held key positions in the tax collection system. That level of intelligence requires inside knowledge, not peasant intuition. Compare that to your typical angry mob. They usually just burn whatever's closest and call it a day. But Tyler's people had lists. They knew names, addresses, and specific locations of important documents. That's not rage, that's planning. And where does a random peasant get that kind of detailed information about government operations? Medieval chroniclers were obsessed with recording everyone's background and family history. They'd tell you about a guy's grandfather's cousin if it made for good storytelling. But with Tyler, they give limited, sometimes contradictory sketches. Even the chroniclers who wrote about the revolt couldn't piece together a clear picture of where this guy came from. That's not just unusual, it's practically impossible in medieval record-keeping. The royal records describe him as speaking like a gentleman and knowing court protocol. He knew how to address the king properly, understood the formal language of negotiation, and carried himself with confidence in front of the most powerful people in England. That's not exactly your average farm worker skill set. You don't learn royal etiquette by accident. This gets even stranger when you realize Tyler negotiated specific political demands during his meeting with the king. He didn't just demand lower taxes or better working conditions. He wanted the abolition of serfdom, the redistribution of church lands, and fundamental changes to England's legal system. Those are sophisticated political positions that require understanding complex economic and legal structures. So was Tyler a lone genius, a military veteran suddenly in favor, or a front for better organized interests? Because Tyler's mysterious background is just the beginning of how these rebels used deception to hide their real organization. The rebels developed an entire system of false identities to hide their real organization. John Ball was a real radical priest, whose inflammatory sermons about equality spread across the countryside, but the rebels also used multiple pseudonyms and assumed names to protect their actual leadership. You've got figures like Jack Straw, that historians can't even agree was a real person, or just a code name that different rebels passed around like a fake ID. Here's what's really clever. Chroniclers sometimes attribute sermons or appearances inconsistently, which could indicate either rapid travel between counties, multiple people sharing the same name, or later confusion by the record keepers themselves. Some records list Jack Straw as a leader in London while others put him in Essex at the same time. The guy shows up in court documents, but nobody can find any trace of him existing before the revolt. It's like he materialized out of thin air, did his revolutionary thing, then disappeared back into nothing. The rebels were smart about this whole identity game. Jack became a widely adopted alias throughout the revolt. You had multiple Jacks operating in different regions, making it impossible for authorities to track down the real ringleaders. You know how many Johns and Williams existed in medieval England? Thousands. Pick a generic name, attach it to revolutionary activities, and good luck to the royal investigators trying to figure out which John actually said what. What made this even more sophisticated was how they used these false identities for specific purposes. Real figures like John Ball handled the religious messaging and ideological recruitment, preaching about equality in ways that sounded like Christianity but everyone knew meant revolution. Meanwhile, the various Jack aliases coordinated military actions and strategic planning. They compartmentalized their leadership structure so that capturing one identity wouldn't bring down the whole network. The rebels also circulated letters and proclamations under these assumed names, passing anonymous messages hand to hand without revealing who was really behind them. Royal spies reported hearing the same exact phrases and rhymes being repeated in taverns across different counties. That's not coincidence, that's coordination. Someone was writing this material and distributing it through their network of false identities. You've got to appreciate the psychology here too. When rebels heard that John Ball was preaching in their area, they knew it was safe to attend and hear the real message. The name became a brand that guaranteed authentic revolutionary content. But when authorities showed up looking for John Ball, they'd find the actual priest plus dozens of people using his name, with no way to prove which appearances were real and which were coordinated deception. These false identities weren't just random, they were carefully crafted personas designed to spread specific messages while protecting the real organizers. The rebels created an entire network of assumed names that let them recruit thousands while keeping their true leadership completely hidden from royal authorities. But fake names were just the beginning of how they stayed invisible. They also developed a communication system that turned everyday religious and social interactions into their private network. I mean, imagine if your local coffee shop was actually a front for coordinating revolutionary activities. And nobody knew except the people who understood the coded conversations. That's basically what these guys pulled off. Except with medieval technology and way higher stakes. Royal investigators found that rebels were using specific Bible verses and religious phrases as coded signals to identify each other. You know how easy it would be to hide messages in religious talk back then? Everyone quoted scripture constantly. But these rebels turned innocent-sounding Bible passages into recruitment tools. A priest could stand up in front of a packed church, recite some verse about justice and equality, and half the congregation would know he was really talking about overthrowing the government. When someone quoted "When Adam delved and Eve span," who was then the gentleman? In the right context, it wasn't just philosophy, it was a watchword. This little rhyme from John Ball's sermons became the rebel equivalent of a secret handshake. You'd hear it in market squares, taverns, even during regular conversations, and boom, instant recognition between conspirators. The beauty of it was that anyone could overhear it and think you were just discussing theology or making small talk about social equality. Some historians and chroniclers later described elaborate coded systems, specific sequences for requesting items in taverns or particular bell-ringing patterns. But the exact rituals are disputed. What we know for certain is that rebels used religious language that could function as safe public messaging, signaling revolutionary meaning to insiders while sounding harmless to authorities. Court records mention rebels carrying letters without seals, basically anonymous messages that could be passed hand to hand without revealing the sender. These weren't formal documents with official signatures and wax seals that could be traced. They were plain pieces of parchment with coded instructions that looked like random notes to anyone who intercepted them, perfect for maintaining secrecy while coordinating complex operations. What's brilliant is they used market days and church gatherings, the medieval equivalent of mass communication, to spread their coded messages to hundreds of people at once. Everyone attended these events anyway, so rebels could distribute information without creating suspicious private meetings. A single coded sermon could reach dozens of conspirators simultaneously. Market day conversations could spread tactical information across entire counties within hours. Royal spies eventually caught on, but by then the rebels had already used these codes to coordinate something that should have been impossible. The authorities figured out the communication system too late to prevent what happened next. By the time they understood what "when Adam delved and Eve span" really meant, the rebels had pulled off a logistical feat that defied medieval limitations. Here's what should freak you out. Rebels across London, Essex, Kent, Norfolk and Suffolk all coordinated attacks within days of each other. And this is 1381 when sending a message took days. I mean, think about the logistics here. You can't just text everyone and say, hey, let's storm the castle at noon. These people were working with horses, foot messengers, and roads that turned into mud swamps when it rained. Yet somehow they pulled off strikes across hundreds of miles with timing that suggests serious planning. The sequence of events shows remarkable coordination. Rebels entered London on June 13th, took the Tower of London on June 14th, and Tyler was killed at Smithfield on June 15th. Meanwhile, attacks in Cambridge, Norfolk, and East Anglia happened throughout mid to late June. The timing was precise enough that royal officials initially thought they were dealing with multiple separate uprisings until they realized it was all connected. You know what that tells me? Someone had spent months, maybe years, planning these attacks. This wasn't spontaneous rage, this was calculated strategy. Some historians debate how centrally coordinated the action really was. They point to local leadership and convergent timing, questioning whether medieval roads could support such rapid communication, but the evidence suggests something more organized than coincidence. These weren't random attacks either. Rebels specifically targeted legal records, tax documents, and court rolls in a coordinated effort to destroy the paperwork that kept the feudal system running. They burned law books, attacked the Temple and Savoy, opened prisons, and targeted officials involved in tax collection. They knew exactly what to burn and what to leave alone. In London alone, they hit multiple government buildings in a sequence that suggests detailed advanced planning and inside knowledge. The rebels weren't just angry, they understood how the system worked and exactly where to hit it to cause maximum damage. What's really suspicious is how rebels in different counties all knew exactly which nobles to target and which buildings contained the most important legal documents. We're talking about specific knowledge of government operations spread across multiple regions. How does a peasant in Norfolk know which building in London houses the tax records? How do rebels in Essex know the names of corrupt officials in Suffolk? Someone was feeding them detailed intelligence about government operations. Royal records show that rebels had detailed lists of specific people to arrest or execute, suggesting someone with access to government information was feeding them intelligence. These weren't hit lists based on local grievances. These were comprehensive target lists that included officials most peasants had never heard of. The rebels knew which judges had been particularly harsh, which tax collectors had been especially corrupt, and which nobles were involved in unpopular policies. That level of detailed information doesn't just fall from the sky. The rebels even coordinated their messaging, with the same demands and proclamations appearing word for word in different counties within days. I'm talking about identical political manifestos showing up in locations that were days apart by horseback. Someone was mass-producing these documents and distributing them through a network that covered half of England. That's not peasant organization. That's professional propaganda distribution. This level of coordination across medieval England required advanced scouts, reliable messengers, secure meeting locations, and backup communication methods. The rebels needed detailed maps, accurate timing systems, and contingency plans for when things went wrong. Did all this precision come from a hidden staff of planners or from local leaders copying the same plan? Because when the authorities tried to figure out who was really behind it all, they started acting very suspicious. The royal response reveals everything you need to know about what they were really dealing with. You know how you can tell when someone's hiding something? They start making up elaborate stories to explain away the obvious truth. That's exactly what happened after the authorities crushed the revolt and realized they needed to control the narrative. Suddenly, royal officials started pushing this whole story about how it was just a spontaneous peasant uprising with no real organization behind it. But here's the thing. Their own records from during the revolt tell a completely different story. Official documents from the time show genuine fear of what they called a great band and unknown Confederates. I mean, those aren't the words you use to describe angry farmers with pitchforks. That sounds like language you'd use for an organized threat that could actually overthrow the government. Later interpretations sometimes inflated that into claims of a full-blown secret society, and historians still debate whether that was accurate or just alarmist panic. King Richard's advisors wrote panicked letters describing rebels who governed themselves like a brotherhood and operated with hidden counsel and secret oaths. These weren't casual observations either. These were official government communications between the highest levels of authority, documenting their fear of an organized conspiracy. You don't write about secret oaths and hidden counsel unless you're dealing with something way more sophisticated than a random mob. The government's post-revolt investigations focused obsessively on finding the true captains and secret movers behind the uprising. They weren't looking for angry peasants who got carried away. They were hunting for masterminds and hidden organizers, which suggests they knew there were secret leaders pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Why waste time and resources searching for conspirators if you genuinely believed it was just spontaneous violence? What's really telling is how the language got twisted over time. What later readers called the Great Society in royal indictments likely meant only a large band in the legal language of the time. Magna Societatis just referred to a big group of people, not some formal secret organization. But you can see how that gets inflated into conspiracy theories centuries later when people read those old documents and assume they're talking about something more sinister. Court records show trials where rebels were tortured specifically to reveal the names of their secret masters and hidden governors. Many leaders were tried and executed, and interrogations under duress produced testimony about oaths and meetings. But this evidence is fragmentary and sometimes unreliable. Torture victims will say anything to make the pain stop. Some interrogation remarks about secret oaths ended up buried in court archives or never made it into later chronicles, so the records are incomplete and biased, meaning the evidence must be weighed carefully. The government's desperate search for secret organizers proves they knew this was more than just angry peasants, but the exact nature of what they were dealing with remains murky. Whether it was a formal conspiracy or just effective coordination, the tactics these rebels used ended up creating a playbook that looks remarkably familiar even today. The parallels between these medieval rebels and what conspiracy theorists claim about modern secret societies are pretty striking, even though we're talking about events that happened over 600 years apart. You'd think people would have come up with new ways to organize secret networks by now, but apparently some tactics just work. Just like modern conspiracy theories describe, the medieval rebels used compartmentalized leadership where most members only knew a few other people in the network. Your average rebel peasant might know 2 or 3 other conspirators in his village, but he had no clue about the bigger picture or who was really running things at the top. That way, if royal officials captured and tortured someone, they couldn't reveal information about the entire operation. Pretty smart for people who supposedly couldn't read or write. Some trial testimonies and later accounts mention oath-taking and ritualized pledges, but the descriptions are inconsistent and often recorded by hostile witnesses who had every reason to make the rebels sound as sinister as possible. You know how medieval chroniclers love to embellish their stories with dramatic details that may or may not have actually happened. The rebels' use of coded religious language mirrors how modern conspiracy theories claim secret societies hide messages in plain sight using symbols and phrases. Just like conspiracy theorists say modern groups put hidden meanings in movies and music, these medieval rebels embedded revolutionary messages in Bible verses and church sermons. They turned everyday religious talk into recruitment tools that authorities couldn't prosecute without looking like they were attacking Christianity itself. Their strategy of infiltrating existing institutions shows similar tactical thinking to what conspiracy theorists claim modern secret societies do. The rebels didn't create new organizations that would attract attention. Instead, they used churches, trade guilds, and market days as communication hubs, turning legitimate gatherings into cover for their revolutionary activities. Sound familiar? That's basically the same approach that conspiracy theorists claim modern groups use to control banks, media companies, and political parties. What's really interesting is how their communication network using trusted messengers, pseudonyms like Jack and Piers Plowman, and unsigned letters basically functioned like an encrypted messaging system. They created secure communication channels that let them coordinate complex operations while keeping authorities in the dark. The medieval version involved coded proclamations and secret passwords, but the principle is similar to how modern conspiracy theorists say secret societies use encrypted communications and private networks. The rebels' ability to coordinate mass action while keeping leadership hidden demonstrates organizational sophistication that rivals anything attributed to modern secret societies. They mobilized thousands of people across multiple counties while maintaining operational security that stumped royal investigators. That level of organizational skill doesn't just happen by accident. It's tempting to call these tactics secret society behavior, but historians debate whether that's fair or just our love of neat labels. Whether you believe in modern conspiracy theories or not, the 1381 revolt proves that hidden networks using these exact tactics have successfully challenged government authority before. The real question is what this tells us about other supposedly spontaneous uprisings throughout history. Looking at the evidence, the 1381 uprising demonstrated organized tactics that terrified England's ruling class. Pseudonyms, targeted strikes, coordinated attacks, and coded communications that stumped royal investigators. But historians still argue whether this amounted to a formal secret society or just effective coordination by desperate people. Here's what actually happened. Richard II granted charters at Mile End which were later revoked. The movement was crushed and many leaders executed. But the revolt did contribute to long-term shifts and serfdom declined over the following century. though that was economic change rather than immediate political victory. I mean, these medieval rebels used tactics that would make modern conspiracy theorists jealous, whether they were an underground conspiracy or just really good at improvising. So which side do you believe, an organized secret network or terrified elites spinning a story? Drop your take in the comments and hit that like button if you want more history as conspiracy content.